Last winter, I was sipping my coffee on the porch of my lake cabin when a car full of loud music screeched to a stop at my driveway. Out stepped a teenage girl I'd never seen, stomping her boots in the snow like she owned the place. She shouted that her mother, yes, the HOA Karen who's been after me for years, had told her my cabin was perfect for her sleepover with friends. That was the moment I realized this battle wasn't over. So, I built a fence. And when she panicked, I watched every second of it. Let us know where you're watching from today. And if you're new here, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to join our growing community. I woke up that morning to the soft crackle of the fireplace and the pale winter sun filtering through the frosted windows of my cabin. Out here, at the edge of the lake where the pines stood tall and silent, mornings were sacred. I like to sit on the porch with a steaming cup of black coffee, listening to the creak of the dock and the distant call of a loon. It was my place of peace, carved out after years of hard work and battles with the HOA that never wanted me here in the first place. I had just settled into that familiar rhythm when I heard the sound of tires skidding on gravel. It wasn't the slow crunch of a neighbor's truck. No, this was fast, reckless. A dark SUV barreled down my driveway, throwing up slush and ice like it owned the road. I squinted and set my coffee down, my gut already tightening. I knew who this was connected to, even before the door opened. The back door of the SUV flew open and out stomped a teenage girl, dressed in bright neon boots and an oversized coat that looked more suited for a fashion show than a snowy morning in the woods. She was holding her phone up, recording herself as she walked, as if she was on some kind of live broadcast. I stood up, resting my hand on the porch railing, waiting for her to notice me. It didn't take long. "You the guy with the cabin," she called out, her voice carrying across the yard like a command. "My mom says we can use it this weekend. We're having a sleepover here." I blinked, certain I had heard wrong. "Excuse me," I asked, stepping off the porch. My boots crunched on the icy ground. "What did you just say?" She rolled her eyes, barely glancing up from her phone. "Yeah, my mom's HOA president or whatever. She told me this cabin's not really yours. Said it's community property or something like that, and we can have our party here. We're coming back tonight." My jaw tightened. I knew exactly whose daughter this was. HOA Karen, real name Beverly, had been on my back for years. She hated that my cabin sat just outside their manicured subdivision. She'd filed complaints about my fire pit, my dock, even the way I stacked wood. I'd won every legal battle, but Karen didn't know how to quit. Now she had sent her daughter to make demands. I took a slow breath, feeling the winter air sting my lungs. "You tell your mom this cabin is mine," I said firmly, stepping closer. "It's not for rent. It's not for parties. And it's definitely not for a sleepover." The girl laughed, actually laughed. "Oh, please. We're coming tonight whether you like it or not. My friends are already packing. It's just a cabin in the woods." "Old man, chill." "Old man." That hit me harder than I cared to admit. I crossed my arms, meeting her gaze. "Not on my property. You're not. If you set foot here tonight, you'll regret it." She gave me a mocking grin and spun around toward the SUV. "Whatever. We'll see about that." Then she slammed the door, and the vehicle tore back up the driveway, leaving deep ruts in the snow. I stood there for a long moment, watching the exhaust trail fade into the cold air. My cabin, my retreat, had just been declared a playground by a spoiled teenager, and behind her was the woman who'd been trying to push me out for years. I could feel the heat of anger rising in my chest, even in the bitter cold. I walked back to the porch, sat down, and stared at the lake. It was frozen over, a sheet of silver stretching to the far pines. This place had been my sanctuary since my wife passed, the one spot where the world's noise couldn't touch me. Now, the HOA's nonsense had reached my doorstep again. I picked up my coffee, now lukewarm, and set it back down untouched. My mind was already spinning, calculating what I'd need to do. If that girl thought she could waltz in here with her friends tonight, she had another thing coming. I wasn't just going to say no, I was going to make sure they couldn't get within 10 feet of this cabin. And that's when the idea hit me. The fence. A real barrier, not just some worn-out sign that said private property. Something sturdy, something visible, something that would make even Karen think twice before trying to cross it. That afternoon, I'd head into town. I'd buy the posts, the wire, and whatever else I needed. But before I made a single purchase, I'd be ready for the storm Karen would bring once she heard about this. She'd probably come marching down here, clipboard in hand, full of fake HOA rules and threats. Well, I'd be waiting. I glanced at the woods beyond the cabin, the bare branches swaying against the pale sky. "Not this time," I muttered. "They're not taking this place from me." The quiet returned, but it wasn't the peaceful kind. It was the tense silence before a fight. And I knew, deep down, this was just the beginning. The drive into town that afternoon gave me time to think about how long this fight had been going on. It wasn't just about a sleepover. It had never really been about one single thing. This war with Karen had started years ago, the day I bought this cabin. I'd found it on the edge of the lake, old, weathered, and nearly forgotten. Most folks in town saw it as a pile of rotting timber, but I saw something else. I saw a place where I could breathe, a place that felt like freedom. My wife and I had dreamed of retiring somewhere quiet, far from the noise of city life. When she passed, this cabin became more than just a plan. It became my way of surviving the grief. Karen, of course, saw it differently. She lived a mile away in a pristine subdivision that looked like it had been stamped out of a catalog. Perfect lawns, white fences, every mailbox lined up like soldiers. When she first came to introduce herself, I remember her standing at the foot of my porch, clutching her clipboard like a weapon. "You know this property is part of the HOA's aesthetic zone." "Right," she said, eyeing my cabin like it was something she'd scrape off her shoe. "We have standards here. Your dock, for example, doesn't match the lake's uniform design." I'd looked her dead in the eye and said, "Lady, this cabin was built before your subdivision even existed. Your HOA doesn't own me, and it doesn't own this land." Her lips tightened into a thin line. I'd learned quickly that Karen didn't take no for an answer. The complaints started almost immediately. She sent letters claiming my woodpile was an eyesore. She filed noise complaints when I used my chainsaw to cut dead branches. Once, she even tried to fine me for leaving a canoe tied to the dock, calling it a navigational hazard. I fought every single one of her claims. Most of the time, she didn't have a legal leg to stand on, but that didn't stop her. She thrived on making people bend to her will. I'd seen her run other neighbors into the ground, forcing them to repaint their homes or tear down porches just because they didn't match her vision for the neighborhood. The difference was, I didn't live in her neighborhood. My cabin wasn't built by their rules. Still, that didn't stop her from acting like it was. One time, she even brought the county sheriff out here, claiming my fire pit was a hazard. I'll never forget the look on the deputy's face as he walked around the cabin, shaking his head. "Sir," he said quietly, "off the record, I think you just got yourself a real piece of work for a neighbor." Karen's worst attempt came 2 summers ago when she tried to get the HOA to vote on reclaiming the land around the lake. She wanted the area turned into a communal recreation spot, complete with picnic tables and a boat launch. She actually stood up at a county meeting and said, "That old cabin is taking up valuable lakefront property." I remember standing there, arms crossed, waiting for my turn to speak. When it came, I laid out every deed, every tax record, every scrap of proof that the land belonged to me and always would. She didn't like losing. She never did. Since then, she'd been quieter, but not gone. I'd catch her SUV idling at the end of my driveway, like she was waiting for me to slip up. Once, I found her walking along the shoreline, taking pictures of my dock. She claimed it was for lake safety records, but I knew better. And now, this sleepover nonsense. It was the kind of stunt only Karen could pull, using her own kid as the messenger, pretending like this was some open space for anyone to use. It wasn't just disrespectful, it was personal. I parked my truck in front of Miller's Hardware, the oldest store in town. Miller, a gruff old man with a gray beard, waved as I walked in. "You look like a man on a mission," he said. "Yeah," I replied, grabbing a cart. "Need to build myself a fence." "Karen again?" he asked, shaking his head like he already knew the answer. "Karen's daughter this time." I said, They're planning to use my cabin like it's a clubhouse. Miller chuckled, though there wasn't much humor in it. You know, I've lived here 30 years. Seen a lot of people come and go, but that woman takes the cake. Yeah, I muttered, loading fence posts and rolls of heavy wire onto the cart. This time, I'm done playing nice. If they want to cross that line, they'll see exactly where the line is. As I paid and carried the supplies to my truck, I could almost picture Karen's face when she saw what I was building. That thought alone made the bitter winter air feel a little warmer. By the time I got back to the cabin, the late afternoon sun was sliding low, turning the snow-covered lake into a sheet of gold. I unloaded the fence posts from my truck, stacking them neatly by the side of the cabin. I had no time to waste. If that girl and her friends thought they were coming here tonight, I was going to make sure they had one rude awakening. As I hammered the first post into the ground, I kept thinking about her smug little grin. She was just like her mother, bold, entitled, and convinced the world would hand her anything she wanted. I could hear her voice mocking me, calling me old man as if I was some relic in her way. I hadn't even finished the second post when I saw the same dark SUV pulling into my driveway again. I straightened, leaning on the hammer, watching as she stepped out, phone in hand. She was filming again, no doubt trying to make me some villain in whatever online drama she was cooking up. "Hey," grumpy she called out. "We're just here to check out the place before tonight. My friends want to see where they'll be sleeping. I told them you'd probably still be grumbling out here." I clenched my jaw. There's not going to be any sleeping here except me in my own cabin. Turn that SUV around and take your friends with you. She smirked and waved her phone like it was proof of ownership. My mom says this cabin is community property. She told me she's been fighting you for years and that it's technically not even legal for you to live here full time. You know what she told me? She said, "Don't let that old man scare you." Something inside me snapped at those words. I walked closer, planting my boots hard in the snow, and stopped just a few feet from her. "Listen carefully," I said, my voice low but firm. "Your mom doesn't own this land. She never has. I've got the papers that say it's mine. And if you or your friends step foot on this property tonight, I won't just call the sheriff. I'll make sure your mom gets fined for trespassing." For a second, I saw her confidence flicker. Just a second. Then she tossed her hair and laughed. "What are you going to do? Sit on the porch with your little hammer all night? My friends are already on their way, so you better get used to the idea. We're having the sleepover. You can either chill or hide in your cabin." I looked past her at the SUV. 3 other girls were sitting inside, faces pressed to the windows, giggling like this was some big game. They looked younger than her, maybe 15 or 16. I couldn't help but wonder what kind of parent drops off their kids at a stranger's cabin without permission, but I knew the answer, someone like Karen. I stepped back and pointed toward the driveway. "Get out of here. Now. I'm not asking again." She sighed dramatically, then turned and yelled to the SUV. "Come on, let's go. He's freaking out already. We'll just come back after dark when he's asleep." The girls inside laughed, and the SUV slowly reversed, spinning its tires as they left. I stood there watching the snow settle after they disappeared, my hands tightening on the hammer. After dark. We'd see about that. I spent the next hour marking the property line. The ground was frozen, making every strike of the post driver a test of strength. The metal rang out with each hit, echoing through the quiet woods. By the time I was halfway through, the sun had dipped behind the trees, casting long shadows across the yard. Inside the cabin, I lit the lanterns and stoked the fire, but my mind was still outside. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee and stood at the window, watching the driveway like a hawk. The lake was completely still, reflecting the pale moonlight, but I knew this calm wouldn't last. Just after 7, I saw headlights cutting through the trees. The SUV was back, only this time it was loaded. Music thumped from inside, and I could hear laughter spilling out before the doors even opened. The girl jumped out first, wearing a bright pink hat and holding a sleeping bag like it was some flag of victory. Her friends followed, each carrying bags and snacks. "Okay, we're here," she shouted, her voice ringing through the cold air. Where's the party? I stepped onto the porch, folding my arms. There is no party here. You're trespassing. Turn around and go home. Oh, come on, she groaned, rolling her eyes. It's just one night. We won't even bother you. We'll stay quiet. Promise. Not happening, I said. She glared at me, clearly not used to hearing the word no. Then she pulled out her phone again. Fine. I'll just call my mom. She'll deal with you. I almost laughed. Go ahead. I'll be waiting when she shows up. The girls muttered to each other, glancing nervously at my half-finished fence. It was already enough to block the driveway entrance, with heavy wire strung between the posts. They weren't getting through without making a scene. I could see their plan falling apart as the night air got colder. But something told me this wasn't over. Not yet. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the cabin made me think of headlights coming up the driveway. Every gust of wind had me glancing toward the lake. But the girls never came back after my warning. Maybe they went home to tell their mother. Maybe Karen was already planning her next move when the first light of dawn hit the snow. I was outside, sleeves rolled up despite the chill. My breath came out in thick clouds as I tightened my gloves and grabbed the post driver. If I was going to stop this nonsense once and for all, this fence had to be more than just a barrier. It had to send a message. The ground was still frozen solid, but I wasn't about to let that slow me down. I dug shallow pilot holes, using the weight of my body to drive each post deep enough to stand on its own. The sound of the driver pounding against the wood echoed across the lake like a drumbeat of defiance. Every post I planted reminded me why I was here, why I fought so hard to keep this cabin mine. By mid-morning, sweat was running down my back under my flannel shirt. My hands were raw from gripping the cold tools, but I kept going. I strung the first roll of heavy wire between the posts, pulling it taut until it sang under the strain. This wasn't some flimsy picket fence. It was a line drawn in steel. As I tightened the wire, I caught movement on the road. My jaw tensed when I saw that familiar white SUV creeping toward my driveway. It was Karen. Of course, it was. She rolled down the window before even stopping, her voice sharp as a winter wind. What is this exactly, she demanded, pointing a manicured finger at the posts. You can't just build some ugly fence across the driveway. That violates our community guidelines. I planted the post driver in the snow and walked toward her slowly. Community guidelines, I repeated. Karen, this isn't your community. This is my property. I'll build whatever I want on it. Her eyes narrowed, and I could practically see the steam rising from her ears. You can't block access to the lake. This is public access. No. I cut her off. The public boat launch is 2 miles down the road. This driveway, this cabin, this land, it's mine. You and your daughter have been told that before. Consider this fence a reminder. Karen's face twisted into a smile that wasn't really a smile. You think you can keep us out with a few sticks and wires? My daughter will have her sleepover tonight. And if you interfere, I'll have you reported. Reported for what I asked, my voice calm but firm, for protecting my property. Go ahead. Call whoever you want. I'm not moving this fence, and I'm sure as hell not letting a bunch of teenagers trash my cabin. Her hands tightened on the steering wheel. You're going to regret this, she hissed. I stepped back and watched as she sped off. Tires spitting gravel. Regret, no. The only thing I regretted was not building this fence sooner. I worked through the afternoon, the fence growing stronger with every hour. By late day, the posts were lined up clean and tight. Wire stretched across like a wall of resolve. At the entrance, I added a heavy wooden gate with a simple chain lock. It wasn't fancy, but it didn't need to be. Anyone trying to force their way through would have to work for it. As I hammered in the last nail, I caught my reflection in the cabin window, sweat-streaked, tired, but more determined than I'd felt in years. This was my line in the sand. Just before sunset, I heard the crunch of tires again. I grabbed a rag to wipe my hands and stepped onto the porch. The SUV was back, but this time, the daughter was alone. She got out, staring at the fence like it was some kind of insult. "What is this?" she shouted. "You can't just lock us out. My friends are already on their way." "Actually, I said evenly. You don't have a single right to be here. Turn around and tell your mom the party's canceled." She stomped her boot on the ground like a child. "You're such a jerk. My mom says this place belongs to everyone around the lake. She said you're just squatting here anyway." I took a step closer, my voice low. "Your mom has lied to you. This place doesn't belong to everyone. It belongs to me, and the next person who tries to break in will find the sheriff waiting for them." Her eyes flickered with uncertainty, but she masked it with a scoff. "We'll see about that," she muttered before storming back into the SUV. I watched her drive away, the gate standing tall between us. The lake glowed orange in the fading light, but all I could feel was the slow burn of anger and resolve. This wasn't just about a sleepover anymore. It was about respect. Tonight, I'd keep watch. And if they tried anything, they'd find out the hard way that I wasn't bluffing. By nightfall, the woods were silent again, but it wasn't the peaceful kind of silence. It was heavy, like the air before a storm. I stoked the fire inside the cabin, the crackle of burning logs, the only sound cutting through the stillness. Every few minutes, I'd glance out the window toward the driveway. The new fence and locked gate stood like a sentinel, gleaming faintly under the cold light of the moon. I made a fresh pot of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, the shotgun propped in the corner, not because I wanted a fight, but because I wasn't going to let anyone, not Karen, not her daughter, step over my line. I wasn't about to spend another winter being bullied on my own land. At 9 p.m., I saw headlights cutting through the trees. My jaw tightened. The SUV was back, and this time, it wasn't alone. 2 more cars followed behind, each one packed with kids. Music thumped from one of them, loud enough to shake the branches. I stepped out onto the porch, coffee mug in hand, and watched the convoy pull up to the locked gate. The daughter, Karen's mirror image in younger form, jumped out first, a pink sleeping bag slung over her shoulder. Her friends spilled out of the cars, laughing, filming everything on their phones like this was some grand adventure. "What's your problem?" she shouted from the gate, hands on her hips. "We're having our sleepover. Open this thing before I call my mom." I sipped my coffee and walked down the steps slowly. "Your mom's the one who put this nonsense in your head. This isn't a park. It's my property. And this gate stays locked." The kids laughed behind her. "He's serious." One of them snickered. She turned and glared at them before spinning back toward me. "Look, old man, we're not hurting anything. We just want to roast marshmallows and hang out. You're being ridiculous." Ridiculous, I stepped closer to the gate. What's ridiculous is thinking you can trespass on a stranger's land because your mother can't take no for an answer. This isn't a joke. Turn your cars around and go home before I call the sheriff. Her face flushed, and for a moment I saw the same fire her mother had entitlement, pure and raw. "My mom says you can't stop us. She's already on her way." I almost smiled. "Good. Let's wait for her together." The kids huddled near their cars, shuffling their feet, their earlier confidence fading with every passing minute. It was cold, barely 20 degrees, and their breath fogged in the air as they whispered to each other. I could tell they weren't used to being challenged like this. After 20 long minutes, the sound of tires crunching on ice cut through the silence again. Karen's white SUV appeared, headlights blazing. She parked in front of the convoy and stepped out, wearing a fur-lined coat and a scowl sharp enough to cut glass. "Are you insane?" she barked, marching up to the gate. "These are kids. They just wanted a harmless night in a cabin. You can't lock them out like this." "This isn't your cabin," I said, my voice steady. "And I'm not letting them turn it into a playground." Karen's lips curled into a smile that wasn't friendly. "You're going to regret this. I'll have the HOA file a complaint so fast your head will spin." "Go ahead," I said, leaning on the gate. "The sheriff already knows you've been harassing me for years." "You're lucky I haven't pressed charges yet," her daughter chimed in. "Mom, just tell him we can stay." Karen ignored her, focusing on me like I was the enemy in her war. "You think you can build a fence and play cowboy. You're just a bitter old man with nothing better to do." That hit a nerve, but I didn't let it show. "No, Karen, I'm a man who knows how to protect what's his. Something you clearly don't understand." The standoff stretched on, the cold biting at all of us. The kids were shivering now, their excitement turning to discomfort. Finally, one of them muttered, "Maybe we should just go home. Karen whipped around. "Don't you dare. We're not leaving because of him." That's when I decided to end it. "Karen," I said, my voice cutting through the night like steel, "you have two choices. Take these kids home and drop this nonsense, or I'll call the sheriff right now. He'll see this gate. He'll see the trespassing. And I'll make sure he hears about every threat you've made." For a moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, Karen's daughter tugged at her coat sleeve. "Mom, it's freezing. Maybe we can do this another time." Karen's jaw worked as if she was chewing nails, but she finally turned and spat. "Fine, but this isn't over." She stormed back to her SUV, yelling at the kids to load up. Engines roared, and within minutes, the convoy disappeared into the trees. I stood there for a long while, staring at the gate, the silence settling back around me. My breath came out in clouds, my hands still tight on the lock. It wasn't a victory I celebrated out loud, but inside, I felt a weight lift. I'd stood my ground, but I knew Karen, and I knew this wasn't the last I'd see of her. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of pounding, not on the cabin door, but in my own head. Karen's face, twisted with rage under the moonlight, had haunted my sleep. I knew she wouldn't let last night go. Karen didn't lose gracefully. I brewed a strong pot of coffee and stepped out onto the porch. The cold air bit at my face, but it was the sight at the end of my driveway that made me stop mid-step. There, parked crosswise across my gate, was Karen's white SUV. She stood beside it like a sentry, arms crossed, clipboard in hand, lips pressed into that thin, menacing smile. "Well, good morning," she said, voice dripping with false sweetness. "You know, I had a very long night thinking about your little stunt yesterday." I sipped my coffee, not in the mood for games. "You mean the stunt where I kept trespassers off my property?" "Yeah, I slept just fine." Her smile vanished. "Don't play coy with me. You embarrassed my daughter in front of her friends. She cried all the way home. Do you know how cruel that was? She's lucky that's all that happened," I replied. "If any of those kids had gotten hurt wandering around here, you'd be the one answering to the sheriff, not me." Karen tapped her clipboard like it was a weapon. "Speaking of the sheriff, I called the county office first thing this morning. I've filed a formal complaint against your illegal fence." I couldn't help but laugh. "Illegal fence, Karen. You've been making up rules since the day I met you. This fence is on my land, and I have every right to build it." Her eyes narrowed. "We'll see about that. I've scheduled an emergency HOA meeting this afternoon. If you think I'm bluffing, you're welcome to come and hear what the community really thinks about your little fortress." "Community?" I raised an eyebrow. "You mean the 5 people you've bullied into nodding at everything you say? No thanks. I'll be right here, enjoying my property like a free man." She tilted her head, smirking. "You've always thought you were better than the rest of us, haven't you? Living out here like some mountain man, ignoring the rules everyone else follows. But this time, you've gone too far." I walked down the steps, stopping just a few feet from her. "Karen, I'm not part of your HOA. I never was. Your rules don't apply to me. And if you or your daughter set foot on this land again, I'll call the sheriff myself. You think I'm bluffing? Try me." For a moment, we stood there, locked in a silent battle of wills. Her face flushed red, but she didn't step closer. Instead, she pointed her pen at me like it was a sword. "This isn't over. I'll be back with paperwork that'll bury you." She drove off with a spray of gravel, leaving me standing by the gate with my coffee cooling in my hand. I sighed, watching her taillights disappear. The truth was, Karen wasn't just annoying, she was dangerous. Her constant meddling could get someone hurt if she didn't learn where the line was. I spent the rest of the morning reinforcing the fence. I added another crossbeam to the gate and strung up fresh private property signs on either side. It wasn't about intimidation. It was about making sure there was no excuse for anyone to claim they didn't see the boundary. By noon, the wind picked up, carrying the distant echo of car horns. That's when I saw them, a small parade of vehicles heading toward the HOA clubhouse down the road. I knew Karen's emergency meeting was starting. I almost chuckled, imagining her standing in front of her neighbors, waving that clipboard like a preacher with a Bible. spinning stories about the grumpy cabin man who dared to block her daughter's party. I wasn't there to hear it, but I didn't need to. Around 3 in the afternoon, the SUV returned. This time, Karen wasn't alone. She brought reinforcements, 2 men from the HOA board. They looked uncomfortable standing beside her as she marched up to the gate. "Here's what's going to happen," she announced, holding up a stack of papers. "You're going to take this fence down immediately, or we'll have no choice but to escalate this legally." I took the papers, glanced at them, and smirked. "Karen, this is a notice about community aesthetics. You might as well have written this on a napkin. It means nothing out here." The 2 board members shifted uncomfortably. One of them, a stocky man with gray hair, spoke up. "Look, maybe we can find a compromise. Karen's passionate. We just want to avoid any trouble." "No trouble here," I said, folding the papers and handing them back, "as long as everyone stays on their side of the gate." Karen's face twisted. "You'll regret this," she hissed again, turning on her heel and stomping back to the SUV. As the sun dipped below the trees, I leaned against the porch railing, watching the shadows stretch across the lake. I knew Karen wasn't done, but neither was I. This wasn't just about a fence or a sleepover. This was about standing up for myself, for the life I'd built out here with my own hands. The night after Karen's so-called emergency meeting, I stayed alert, expecting trouble. People like Karen never took no as an answer. I had a feeling she'd try one last stunt to prove she could push me around. The sky had turned pitch black, with the lake reflecting nothing but the pale shine of the moon. I was sipping coffee by the window when I saw headlights flicker through the trees again. My heart sank, but I wasn't surprised. Karen's white SUV led the way, followed by another car full of teenagers. She was back for round 2, and this time, she brought back up. I grabbed my heavy lantern and stepped out onto the porch, keeping my expression calm. My fence and locked gate stood there like a challenge, silver wire catching the moonlight. As Karen pulled up, her daughter jumped out, frustration written all over her face. The girl stomped toward the gate with 2 of her friends trailing behind her. "Open the gate! Old man," she shouted, voice cracking with nerves. "We're having our party, and you can't stop us." I rested the lantern on the porch rail. "You need to turn around and go home. Last warning." The kids whispered to each other, clearly unsure. One of them pointed at the fence and muttered, "We can climb over." That's when Karen got out, slamming her car door like a judge banging a gavel. "Enough of this nonsense," she barked. "Move your little fence or I'll call the sheriff myself. These kids are freezing. You're being cruel." I laughed quietly, shaking my head. "Cruel Karen, you're the one dragging teenagers out here in the dark. I told you this isn't your property. Now get them back in those cars before something happens. You'll regret." Karen crossed her arms, glancing at her daughter. "Sweetheart, just climb over. He can't stop you." Her daughter looked hesitant, her earlier bravado fading fast. The girls huddled together, staring at me like I was some immovable wall. "Mom," the girl muttered, "what if he calls the sheriff?" That was my moment. I stepped closer to the gate and pulled my phone from my pocket. "You know what? Let's do that right now." I started dialing, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Sheriff's office." "Yeah, I've got trespassers here at my cabin again. You might want to come take a look." Karen's face went pale. "You wouldn't dare." "Oh, I would," I said evenly, locking eyes with her. "And when the sheriff gets here, I'll be showing him every video clip of you and your daughter threatening me. I'm done with this game. Karen, this ends tonight." The kids started shuffling nervously, their fun turning to fear. "Maybe we should just leave," one of them whispered to Karen's daughter. Karen's daughter looked from me to the locked gate, her shoulders slumping. For the first time, she seemed to realize that her mother's lies had led her into this mess. "Mom," she said softly, "can we just go home?" "This is stupid." Karen spun on her, shocked. "What did you just say?" The girl's voice cracked. "You told me this cabin wasn't his, that we could come here. But it is his. Isn't it you lied?" "You always lie." Those words hit harder than anything I could have said. Karen's face flushed red. her anger collapsing into something that looked almost like shame, but not quite. "Get in the car," she snapped. The kids didn't argue. They scrambled into the vehicles, the sound of doors slamming echoing through the cold night. Karen stood there for a moment longer, glaring at me as if trying to burn a hole through my fence. "This isn't over," she hissed, but the fire in her voice had dimmed. I didn't bother replying. I just stood there, leaning on the gate, watching as she finally turned and got back into her SUV. The convoy of cars disappeared down the road, taillights glowing like angry embers. When the silence returned, it felt different this time, cleaner, like the lake after a storm. I walked back to the porch, set the lantern down, and let out a long breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. I hadn't just won an argument, I'd reclaimed my peace. Inside, I poured myself another cup of coffee and sat by the fire. For the first time in days, I felt like the cabin was truly mine again. The fence stood firm outside, and the night was quiet, except for the whisper of wind through the pines. Still, I knew Karen well enough to realize she wasn't finished, but her daughter's words had cut her deeper than any legal threat ever could. Maybe, just maybe, that was the beginning of the end of her fight with me. The next morning, I woke to a quiet that felt different, lighter, almost as if the woods themselves had taken a deep breath and settled. The fence stood strong outside, a line of defiance that had finally brought Karen's nonsense to a halt. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel that knot of anger tightening in my chest. I poured myself a fresh cup of coffee and stepped out onto the porch. The lake was frozen and smooth as glass, the pale light of dawn spilling across it like silver paint. I leaned against the railing, letting the cold air bite my face, and thought about everything that had happened. Karen's daughter's words replayed in my head. "You always lie." Those 4 words were worth more than any argument I could have made. I knew Karen would never admit she was wrong, but the look on her face last night, humiliation mixed with shock, was proof that her reign of control had cracked. Maybe not broken entirely, but cracked enough to give me room to breathe. Around mid-morning, I saw a pickup truck coming down the road. It wasn't Karen this time, it was Sheriff Miller. I met him at the gate, where he gave me a firm nod. "Morning," he said, rubbing his gloved hands together against the cold. "Heard there was some excitement last night. Got a few calls about noise and headlights near your place." I gestured toward the fence. Karen brought her daughter and a bunch of kids here for some kind of party. I told them to leave, and they did. I just wanted to make sure this doesn't turn into a bigger mess. The sheriff's eyes scanned the fence with something like approval. "Looks solid. You've got every right to build it, too. Karen's been on a tear lately, bothering half the people around here. She's been warned. But..." He trailed off with a sigh. "Yeah, I know the type," I said. He tipped his hat. "Just keep doing what you're doing. If she gives you trouble, call me directly. We've had enough of her drama." After he left, I stood there for a while, watching the truck disappear into the trees. A strange feeling settled over me, a mix of relief and quiet pride. For so long, Karen had made me feel like I had to defend every inch of my life out here, as if I owed her an explanation for existing. But last night, for the first time, I'd seen her lose control, not just with me, but with her own daughter. In the days that followed, I didn't see Karen's SUV near my driveway. No more loud demands, no surprise visits, no kids stomping around with sleeping bags. I wasn't naive enough to think she was gone for good, but for now, the peace held. I spent those quiet mornings repairing the dock and stacking firewood, small chores that reminded me why I loved this cabin in the first place. It wasn't just a piece of land or a structure by the lake. It was freedom. It was a promise I made to myself after losing my wife that I'd keep living, keep fighting for the things that mattered. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the tree line, I sat on the porch with a fresh pot of coffee and let the warmth of the cup seep into my hands. The world felt still. The fence I'd built stood strong, but I realized it wasn't just about keeping Karen out. It was about proving to myself that I could stand my ground, no matter who tried to push me. Some battles aren't fought with fists or shouting, they're fought with stubbornness, with the quiet refusal to be moved. That's what this cabin had taught me. That's what this fight with Karen had reminded me of. As I watched the sky turn shades of pink and gold, I thought about how many people let themselves get pushed around, believing they don't have a choice. Maybe my story could remind someone that standing firm doesn't make you cruel, it makes you free. So, if you're watching this and you've ever had someone like Karen in your life, remember this: you have the right to protect your peace, your home, and your happiness. Don't let anyone take that from you. If this story made you think, or if you've ever had to stand your ground against someone who just wouldn't quit, I'd love to hear about it. Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy stories like this, consider subscribing for more. Life's too short to let the Karens of the world win. Let's keep our peace and our freedom, one story at a time.